I'm working in my kitchen this morning because my garage is far too cold to do glue-ups, and even if I heated it for the actual gluing process, I wouldn't want to leave the wood in there. I'd have to bring it in anyway, so I figured I'd use my kitchen island as an auxiliary work table. And since I'm working with wood glue that washes up, there really is no downside. I didn't really expect to be making a video, but as I was setting things up, I realized that I automatically do things now that might not have occurred to me when I was a newer woodworker. And I said, gee, this is perfect for a short video. For those of you who may assume that gluing is gluing, what is there to know about gluing, and then have been disappointed with your results. What I'm gluing up this morning is the first step of a new bowl design that I'm working on. And the first step involves taking 2 pieces of wood. These have been cut in half, they've been jointed. I have a strip that's cut. I've checked to make sure that I have a good glue line joint. So when I put these together, I'm not going to be forcing them together, but just putting it together lightly. Actually, if you're gluing up well, you sometimes don't even need clamps. The clamps are to hold it in place, not to mash it together. And the first thing that I did, as I brought my equipment in, which did force me to think about what I wanted, was to find a base on which I could put my workpiece. I have 2 pieces here. For one of them I used a piece of plywood, flat piece, and the other is this piece of laminate covered something or other that I always use for small glue-ups. I covered it with wax paper. You don't want to start gluing and say, oh my God, I forgot the wax paper. And I set it up, and then I checked to see if the clamps I chose would do the job. I used 2 different clamps, mainly because I only have 2 of each size, but they're all appropriate for it. And I wanted to make sure that I could do the gluing in the center, give the pressure in the center of the wood. If you look at illustrations sometimes of what goes wrong, if the clamp is positioned high up on the wood, you're going to get more pressure on the upper part and you may get separation on the bottom. For some clamps, it's almost impossible to get them centered unless they are off the surface on which your workpiece is located. For others, it's all right. And these clamps have very small parts, which makes it ideal. Since this is just a rough blank and I'm going to be cutting basically an oval bowl out of it, I don't have to protect the outer edges. But if I were doing more conventional joinery, if I were going to join some more boards to this, I would put pads to protect them from the pressure. In this case, it really does not matter. And I do have pads for some of these clamps that I can put on. All right, what I did was I put the piece in place, inserted this little strip of Purple Heart that I'll be gluing it together. I had drawn guidelines on my wood so I would be able to line things up properly. And I did a test run. I opened the clamp to the position that I would need, and I tightened it. I determined that I needed the handle to be hanging over the top of the work table and not on it, which would make it very difficult to turn. So I oriented it properly, and I tightened it, and I did the same on the other side when I was testing it, and I looked at the end of it to see if I would need to put downward pressure or a caul. Since this is nice flat wood, and I'm putting it on a flat surface, and it goes together easily, I'm not going to need a caul, but I wanted to make sure, and when I tighten this up, since I don't have to tighten the life out of it, I'm not going to force it up in the middle. All right, so that once I determined this, I got ready to do the gluing. I also, by the way, did the same thing with these other clamps that are larger, and when I tried them out, I determined that they needed to sit on the plywood because they're so heavy and big and this will hold them firmly in place. So I'm going to do them sequentially. But the gluing part is the easy part. I'm sure you all know how to apply glue. But I did set up my little glue station. I have my little silicone glue dish, which actually works well, my little silicone glue brush. Sometimes you have to treat yourself to some of these new things. And my glue bottle. So that when I'm ready to glue, which I'm not going to show you because I think you know how to glue things in place. I'll describe the process, but when I'm busy gluing, I don't want to be talking. I want to be gluing and paying attention to it. I'll put some glue in here so I have it handy. I won't need a lot of glue. And that way I can easily get it, and the gluing is not going to be a problem. And the wax paper means I can put it down wherever. I'm not going to have to look for a surface on which to put it down. Now, the particular technique I use when I'm gluing in things like this works very well for me and is wonderful if you're gluing small, fidgety objects, and particularly if you're gluing things on the diagonal where they want to slip. These clamps actually have a very nice feature. They're Craftsman clamps, and they have a little notch, so that when I'm gluing something from point to point, I can actually seat the notch, the point in the notch, and it holds it quite firmly. Most clamps don't have that feature. And these were a little pricey. I'm not sure who makes them for Craftsman, but it's a very, very good product. When I apply the glue, since it's conventional wood glue, I'll be applying it to both surfaces. This I jointed. I have a sand flea sander, which makes jointing small pieces very safe. And I made sure that I didn't see any light and that it was a good surface. I'll be applying glue to this surface and this surface. I do this first, then I rub them together. If you rub them together, I believe what happens is that you're forcing air out, and you move it until you get a real drag. It gets tacky, and that means that it's adhering. And at that point, and I've seen turners do this, gluing up little segments for the segmented turnings, it's good enough to leave. It will hold. You will not get spaces. But I do this until I have drag, and then I repeat it. I add glue to the other side and to the other side of this, and I rub that back and forth. And I make sure that the lines that I drew initially are lined up. This keeps the grain in alignment to preserve the illusion that it's a single piece of wood. Once that's done and they're settled, I'll put the clamps on, but as I put the clamps on, I will put both of them on and tighten them one and then the other. I guess you'd call that in sequence, because if you tighten too much, the wood wants to slide and it slips out of alignment. I think it's probably the torquing when you twist the handle that sends the wood where you're torquing it, and you end up then with things out of alignment. Here I have very clear visibility, and as soon as something starts slipping, I can move it back into place, and when it's held together, remember if you clamp too tightly, you're going to squeeze glue out and actually end up with a glue-starved joint. You don't want that. And I have the amount of squeeze out that says I've applied the right amount of glue. I leave it. If I needed to, I could take the clamps off. If I found that the clamping pressure was forcing it out of position, and as many of you know, sometimes when you leave the room, you come back and things have happened in your absence, I might take the clamps off. If it looks solid, then I'll leave it. And I check again to make sure that it hasn't raised in the middle. And if there is a problem, well, you take it and you pull it apart, and if it's really stubborn, you crack it on an edge. I've done this sometimes with things that have almost set up when I discovered something that was completely unacceptable, something rose or was otherwise off, and I didn't want to waste the wood. And it's a little draconian, but it's better than wasting wood. And if you're going to ruin it anyway, there's really no harm. I mean, you could even hit it with a mallet just to snap it off, clean up the glue, and then start over again. All right. This sort of is like the quick tips section of magazines. This is a quick tip video, and if it saves anyone some wood or some grief, then it was worth doing. Thanks for watching.